Monica Brown is an inspiring author of children's bilingual and multicultural books. Her stories are full of color, magic, and whimsical lines that draw you to take a ride with her into her books. Her books have inspired teachers like me to develop multicultural lessons that not only engage students, but make them part of the story. Through her books, my students became storytellers, writers, poets, and artists. Some of her stories take famous Latinos that they have normally would not have learned as children and learn all about them. She provides role models for them. Through these books, they get a sense of pride for their culture. She provides a role model for them. Throughout her books, children learn about people like Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Pablo Neruda. Reading about these characters gives students a sense of pride. To have such famous and influential people is part of their cultural roots. Monica Brown is an English professor at North Arizona University, specializing in U.S. Latino literature and multicultural literature. She writes scholarly works with Latinos as a focus. Her published work range from delinquent citizens, nations, and identity in Chicanos to Puerto Rican gang narratives to children's books like Chavela and the Magic Bubble. From her scholarly examinations, her children's books, Monica Brown's works reflects her lifelong advocacy for cultural studies and bilingual education. Monica's books are inspired by her Caribbean and American heritage and the desire to share Latino stories with children.
I began writing children's books serendipitously because I had been a journalist, a professional journalist, my first job out of college for an American-owned paper in Guadalajara. And then my second career as a writer was as a literary scholar, and I wrote about Chicano and Latino literature, and that was my specialty. And then I had children, and I started to read and discover the world of children's books, rediscover it, and there were really no stories about people that I thought were pretty important, about people like Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Gabriela Mistral and Celia Cruz. And so I first became interested because there were, stories I wanted my children to know. My daughters, Isabella and Juliana. With my daughter, Isabella, we would read her like 20 or 15. Of course, both my husband and I are English professors, so we were a little obsessive. And I'm also the daughter of an artist. My mother was an amazing artist, and I actually think to write for children, that's the toughest thing, because you write for artists too. So the children's book is the place where text and art meet. And I think that's, if I have a special gift, it's to be able to write illustratable action and to really think visually. So all these experiences in my life came together. And then once I started, I couldn't stop. I loved it so much, and I still do.
Monica Brown was born in the Bay Area of California. She is the daughter of a Peruvian South American mother and a Jewish Italian North American father. Her mother was a vibrant abstract Peruvian painter. Growing up, she traveled back and forth between California and Peru. English and Spanish was her bridge between her North American father and her South American mother. Pelé, king of soccer, el rey del fútbol. Turn the pages of this book to read the true life story of Pepe, the king of soccer, the first man in history of sports to score 1,000 goals and become a living legend.
I'm always surprised when I start researching a new figure. And what's fun is we usually know these figures like Celia Cruz, like Pablo Neruda as adults. But what I do is I go into their childhood, because that's what children relate to most. So I get to find out cool details, like Pablo Neruda wrote with green pens only and liked to wear a top hat. One thing I recently found out about Pablo Picasso, which is a book that I have coming out with Santillana, in 2012 was that as a child, he had a lot of difficulty with math because instead of seeing like the number 7, he would see an upside down nose, or instead of seeing 2 6s, he would see 2 angels' wings. And so I loved that idea so much, and that one little detail made me decide to name the book What Pablo Saw, because we know about his art. He saw things in pink. He saw things fractured and put back together again. He saw things in blue. He had all these periods of his art, the creation of his art. So I loved that. And I also found out that his first words were peace for lapis, and I loved that idea. So sometimes this small detail that isn't even well known from artist's childhood will inspire, the shape of a whole book.
Dr. Monica Brown is an author of many award-winning books for children. Her book, Pablo Neruda, A Poet of the People, is the winner of the Americas Award for Children's Literature and an Orbis Pictus honor for the outstanding nonfiction. Waiting for Biblioburro, that book is a Christopher Award winner. Her picture book, Marisol McDonald Doesn't Match, is a winner of the Texas Star Book Award, the International Al Latino Book Award, and the Pura Belpré honor for illustration. Her first bilingual book was My Name is Celia, Me Llamo Celia. It was published in 2004. The book told the life of Celia Cruz in a fun and whimsical way. The story is a first narrative of the Cuban-born salsa singer. This is a great book to lead into a geography lesson. It could also be used for a writing activity about census. Another class activity you can do is a research project where students can investigate their own family heritage. Monica Brown also wrote a great book about Tito Puente, the Mambo King.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, clap your hands for Tito Puente.
Damas y caballeros, niños y niñas, aplaudan a Tito Puente.
Before he could walk, Tito was making music. He banged spoons and forks on pots and pans, windowsills and cans.
Aún antes de caminar, Tito ya hacía música. Usaba cucharas y tenedores para golpear ollas y sartenes, afeizares y latas.
Toom tick a tack tick, toom tick tom tom. Tito loved to dance too.
A Tito también le encantaba bailar.
Tap tippy tap tip tap tap. On weekends, Tito played magical mambos and beautiful cha-chas with different bands at the Palladium Ballroom in New York City. People loved dancing to salsa and the rhythms of Tito and his timbales.
Durante los fines de semana, Tito tocaba mambos mágicos y cha-cha-chas bellos con diferentes bandas en el salón de baile Palladium de Nueva York. A la audiencia le encantaba bailar al son de la salsa y de los diferentes ritmos que Tito tocaba con sus timbales.
When the Tito Puente Orchestra played, the tambourine sounded like rain on metal roofs.
Cuando la orquesta de Tito Puente tocaba, las panderetas sonaban como la lluvia cayendo sobre techos de metal.
The claves smacked clackety clackety clack clack, and everyone's feet went tappity tap. Best of all, Tito played the timbales.
Las claves se golpeaban, clackety clackety clack clack, y todos los pies hacían un tapity tap. Y lo mejor de todo, Tito tocaba sus timbales.
Toom tick a tack tick, toom tick tom tom. On a hill, behind a tree, there is a house. In the house, there is a bed, and on the bed, there is a little girl named Anna. Tack-a-tack, clip-clop. When Anna looks down the hill below her house, she sees a man with a sign that reads, Biblioburro. Who are you? Who are they? The children ask. The man says, I'm a librarian, a bibliotecario, and these are my burros, Alpha and Beto. While Alpha and Beto chomp the sweet grass under the tree, Anna picks up book after book and finds pink dolphins and blue butterflies, castles and fairies, talking lions and magic carpets. This fictional story about a little girl, a librarian, and 2 book-carrying burros was inspired by the heroic efforts of real-life librarian Luis Soriano.
En un libro podemos encontrar ciudades, culturas, derechos, deberes. Entonces, un niño que estamos hoy educando a través del biblioburro, lo estamos enseñando sus derechos, sus deberes y sus compromisos. Y cuando un niño conoce sus derechos, sus deberes y sus compromisos, es un niño informado para no a la guerra.
Waiting for the Biblioburro is a celebration of the imagination and honors all who put books in the hands of children.
I think the best way to engage reluctant readers is by giving them really good stories. And I think that's the magic of school visits and storytelling, because you get to put all the passion and into the story and act it out. But I also think in any good children's book, there's a world of possibilities, curricular possibilities, musical possibilities. And so with my books, most of them have curriculum guides that are developed by really amazing elementary educators and education professors, because I think a book is the inspirational part, and then it opens a world, and then they can learn about geography or learn about the different steps, between the field and the table in terms of the food they eat every day.
Chabela in the Magic Bubble. Luscious, candy-colored paintings illustrate this fantastic story with an ecological twist. Chabela is taken by a magical bubble to the rainforest to learn where natural chewing gum comes from and her family connections to it. There's some great activities you can do with this book. Chabela in the Magic Bubble is a literature text, and it can be used to do some comparing and contrasting with an informational text of the rainforest. This book can also be used to introduce a unit on sustainable farming. Another way to use this book is to do a lesson on traditional Latin American folk songs, which are introduced in the story. Me llamo Gabito, the life of Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Monica Brown traces the novelist's life in this creative nonfiction picture book from his childhood in Colombia till today. The story is full of imagination and beauty. Some great activities you can do with this book is to introduce the children to the concept of magical realism, social justice, and dreaming big. You can teach your kids how to use a thesaurus using this book, because you want to teach them how to make their words more colorful, just like Gabito. You could also use this book to teach your children how to read with fluency. You can record the book and present it to bring it alive for the audience, to draw them into the magical world of Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And that's exactly what my students did.
My name is Me llamo Gabito. A ship or sailor living on air and sea for 8 days.
Can you imagine a trail of butterflies flaring their wings to songs of love? Can you imagine gold and silver fish swimming in the air?
¿Te imaginas? تقدر تتخيل تمر فانتظرت.
Can you imagine? Once there was a little boy named Gabito who could. This little boy would become one of the greatest storytellers of all time.
To Gabito, the world was a magic place.
He grew up in a little house with his big family and, according to his grandmother, a strange and mysterious ghost.
Sometimes little Gabito would imagine the ghost lady gliding through his house and rocking the empty rocking chair in the family room, back and forth, back and forth.
Gabito never sat on that rocking chair because he didn't want to squish the ghost.
Gabito's imagination was big. Gabito also lived with an amazing 100-year-old talking parrot named Lorenzo the Magnificent. Lorenzo would make up stories of his own, just like Gabito, and sometimes his stories turn out to be true. Gabito's imagination was wild.
Gabito's favorite person in the whole world was his grandfather, Nicholas. He had a giant dictionary filled with amazing words.
The more words Gabito learned, the more stories he told.
Under the hot sun, Gabito grew tall. He learned that ghosts were real, that parrots sometimes speak the truth, and that not everything, even in this magical world, is fair. But most importantly, he learned that he loved stories.
Can you imagine a man with enormous wings falling from the sky?
¿Te imaginas? تقدر تتخيل تمر فانتظرت.
Can you imagine the most beautiful woman in the world?
تمر فانتظرت. ¿Te imaginas? تقدر تتخيل.
Can you imagine flying through the air on a magic carpet?
¿Te imaginas? تقدر تتخيل تمر فانتظرت.
If these stories are magical, it's because they are, and they were written by a boy called Gabito, who grew up to be Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the greatest storyteller, read by millions, loved by all. Imagine what kind of stories Gabito told? Close your eyes and see.